Man Visible and Invisible by C.W. Leadbeater. Chapter 15. Early Stages of Man's Development. When we apply the information contained in Chapter 13 to the consideration of the mind-body of a primitive man as shown in Plate 6, certain facts about the man at once become obvious. Although on the whole it is a very poor and undeveloped mind-body, yet some progress has already been made. The dull yellow at the top indicates a certain amount of intellect, but also shows by the muddiness of the color that it is applied exclusively to selfish ends. The devotion denoted by the gray-blue must be a fetish worship, largely tinged with fear, and prompted by considerations of self-interest, while the muddy crimson on the left points to a commencement of affection, which must as yet be principally selfish also. The band of dull orange implies pride, but of quite a low order, while the large dash of scarlet expresses a strong tendency to anger, which would evidently blaze out upon very slight provocation. The broad band of dirty green, which occupies so great a portion of the body, shows forth deceit, treachery, and avarice, the latter quality manifesting itself in the brownish tint which is observable. At the bottom, we notice a sort of deposit of mud color, suggesting general selfishness and the absence of any desirable quality. It is just that absence of any well-defined higher quality which makes us certain that in turning to the corresponding astral body on Plate 7, we shall find it almost entirely uncontrolled. Accordingly, we see how enormous a portion of this vehicle of desire is occupied exclusively by sensuality, proclaimed by the very unpleasant brown-red, which is almost blood color. Deceit, selfishness, and greed are conspicuous here, as might be expected, and fierce anger is also implied by the smears and the blots of dull scarlet. Affection is scarcely indicated at all, and such intellect and religious feeling as appear are of the lowest possible kind. Another point which should be noticed is the irregularity of the outline of this astral body, the generally blurred effect, and the manner in which the colors are arranged. As we pass to the vehicles of the more evolved human beings, we shall find a considerable improvement in this respect. The colors always to some extent intermingle and melt into one another, but nevertheless in the ordinary man they have a tendency to lie in more or less regular bands, while the outline of the body becomes fairly definite and regular. With the undeveloped man, however, all this is ill-regulated and confused. He is obviously a creature of violent and often vicious impulses, to which he instantly yields without the slightest effort to control them. A very unpleasant person altogether, yet every one of us has passed through this stage, and by the experience gained in it, we have been enabled to rise out of it to something purer and nobler. It will be very necessary for us to bear constantly in mind, in our endeavor to realize the appearance of the various vehicles, that the particles of which they are composed are always in rapid motion. In certain cases, which will be specifically mentioned in their turn, there are definite bands and there are clearly defined lines in these bodies, but in the vast majority the clouds of color not only melt into one another, but are all the while rolling over one another and appearing and disappearing as they roll. Indeed, the surface of this luminous and brightly colored mist resembles somewhat the surface of violently boiling water, in the way that the particles seem to swirl around and to rise to the surface and sink back again, and constantly to change places with one another, so that the various colors by no means retain always the respective positions in which they are represented in our illustrations. Yet it is nevertheless true that they gravitate towards the arrangement here portrayed, that though the yellow, the rose, and the blue are not always to be found grouped exactly as depicted, yet in all their whirlings and rollings they remain near the upper part of the oval. They are always found to be near the head of the physical body when they exist at all, while the colors which mark selfishness, avarice, deceit, or hatred tend to always appear towards the bottom, and the great mass of sensual feeling floats usually between the two. Each of these rates of vibration, which show themselves to us as colors, has its own special type of astral or mental matter, in which it can operate most freely, and the average position of these colors in the ever-shifting mist cloud depends in reality upon the respective specific gravity of its special matter. The whole, or almost the whole, of the matter in an astral body must be temporarily forced by a sudden rush of passion to vibrate at a certain rate. But all of it except that to which the vibration is natural will fall back into its ordinary rate when the force is removed. Naturally, each man has his own individual idiosyncrasies, and no two are alike, but each illustration given represents a section of an average specimen of its class, and its various hues are shown in the part of the ovoid where they are usually to be found.